Good evening, everybody. It is 6:02 p.m. on June 15th, 2023. I'm Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the planning board. With me tonight is our vice chair, Amelia Aboff, our clerk, Erin Gino, our members, Jahan Habib, Luke Schuster, Michael McNeely, and Debbie Howard Easton. We have a number of items on our agenda this evening, but first, pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Somerville Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. Audio recording of these proceedings will be available by using the registration link at the top of the agenda. Once the meeting has concluded, this meeting is, as referenced by the statement I just made, being recorded. So we have, like I said, a number of items on the agenda. The first will be the discussion and the approval of 2 meeting minutes for April 6th and April 20th, 2023. We have 3 public hearings which have previously been opened and heard, and all 3 of them will be requesting continuances. So I will be going down the agenda pretty quickly on those, and then we will have discussion of 4 other items of other business, which are zoning amendment recommendations to the city council. So what I will do now is bring up our meeting minutes. So has everybody had the opportunity to review the draft meeting minutes of April 6th, 2023, and does anybody have any suggested revisions or amendments or corrections? Okay, seeing none, the chair moves to approve the April 6th draft meeting minutes as the final meeting minutes of the planning board, seconded by Amelia. Emily, could I please ask you to call the roll?
Yes, Amelia Aboff?
Aye.
Erin Gino?
Aye.
Jahan Habib?
Aye.
Luke Schuster?
Aye.
Michael McNeely?
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton?
Aye.
Michael Capuano?
Aye. We have meeting minutes for the 6th, April 20th, 2023. Does anybody have any suggestions, revisions, amendments to the draft minutes of April 20th? I see Amelia's hand. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if it could be corrected that my presence was absent/recused. That's been our process in the past.
Yeah. Anybody else have any suggestions or revisions? Seeing none, the chair moves to approve as amended the draft meeting minutes of April 20th, 2023, seconded by Jahan. Emily, could I have you call a roll, please?
Amelia Aboff?
Aye.
Erin Gino?
Aye.
Jahan Habib?
Aye.
Luke Schuster?
Aye.
Michael McNeely?
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton? Michael Capuano?
Aye. We have meeting minutes. Next up on the agenda, taken in order in which they appear, 620 Broadway. It's my understanding, Emily, that the applicant has requested a continuance to the July 20th meeting. Is that accurate?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
And in that case, the chair moves to continue that agenda item to July 20th, seconded by Amelia. Please call the roll.
Amelia Aboff?
Aye.
Erin Gino?
Aye.
Jahan Habib?
Aye.
Luke Schuster?
Aye.
Michael McNeely?
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton? Michael Capuano?
Aye. Agenda item is continued. Next up is 16 and 20 Medford Street, and this particular one is planning and zoning 23-011. My understanding of the applicant has requested a continuance also to July 20th. Emily, that's accurate?
This is Emily Hutchings. That is correct.
Okay, the chair moves to continue that agenda item to July 20th, seconded by Amelia. Please call the roll, Emily.
Amelia Aboff?
Aye.
Erin Gino?
Aye.
Jahan Habib?
Aye.
Luke Schuster?
Aye.
Michael McNeely?
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton. Michael Capuano.
Aye. That agenda items continued to July 20th. The next up is 16 and 20 Medford Street. This is planning and zoning 23-012. Emily, they have also requested a continuance July 20th. That's still correct?
This is Emily Hutchings. That is correct.
And the chair moves to continue that agenda item to July 20th, seconded by Amelia. Emily, please call the roll.
Amelia Aba.
Aye.
Erin Gina.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Michael Capuano.
That agenda item is continued. We have 4 other items that are other business. And those 4 items are the items that were subject for discussion at a joint hearing of the Land Use Committee and the Planning Board a number of weeks ago. And for clarity for the participants, it's Mayor Ballantyne, number 1, Mayor Ballantyne requesting ordainment of an amendment to section 12.2 of the zoning ordinances to reflect the recommendations in the 2022 Somerville Linkage Nexus Study. Number 2 is John Fragioni and Agostino Fiola requesting the adoption of an amendment to the zoning ordinance map to change the zoning district of 295 to 297 Bedford Street and 93 Walnut Street from MR3 to MR5. Number 3 is Union Square 1 Development LLC requesting the adoption of a zoning text amendment to section 8.7.G.3 to permit variations to build out regulations by special permit in the CC5 district USQ sub area. And number 4 is Mayor Ballantyne requesting ordainment of an amendment to section 8.1 affordable housing of the zoning ordinances to remove errant text, which is a broad term, and amend the dimensional standards. So what I'd like to do first is, Emily, can I confirm, are all of these agenda items still before the planning board?
This is Emily Hutchings. Yes, these agenda items are still before the planning board.
It was my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, was one of these agenda items, were they withdrawn or are you sure they're still before us?
No, this is Emily Hutchings again. There was a separate map, I believe it was a map amendment request that was withdrawn, but it was separate from these 3 items.
So there are 3 items before us, not 4.
That is correct.
Okay, and it is the 3 items before us is section 12.2, Union Square 1 development, and the affordable housing. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, those are the 3 that we'll be proceeding with this evening. The first I will be taking up is, as it is the discretion of the chairman of the planning board, taking items out of order. I'm going to take affordable housing first, which is item 4 of the items that are listed in other business. And I would invite our members to ask any questions or make any comments that they have of staff, as this is an amendment brought forward by the administration. Does anybody have any comments or questions of staff right now? Or comments that they would like to make? I see Erin's hand, so I'll recognize you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually wanted to ask a clarifying question or maybe an understanding question around the map that was provided by staff for the affected parcels, which I found really helpful. So from my understanding, there's some like 100 or so affected parcels, and most of them, because it's the MR districts, are along sort of main corridors. And it's my understanding that those main corridors, like at least the overlay that I was kind of doing, is there's a high overlap between the affected parcels and what's called out as a sort of enhanced district in in the Somerville or in the Summer Vision plans. So where neighborhood residential is conserved, we've got the MR as enhance, and like the sub area districts as transform. Is my understanding correct there, where there's kind of a high overlap of the affected parcels and the sort of enhance districts?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is Deputy Director of Planning Preservation and Zoning, Daniel Bartman. Yes, that I would say that does directly correlate. Most of our squares and main streets and corridors are all in the enhancement area identified in Summer Vision. So I would say that the MR districts, is a fairly good match for those same areas.
Okay, that's very helpful, and it colors the sort of comment that I have about my opinion on this, which I'm happy to hold in case anyone else has clarifying questions.
Anybody else at this time? I see Amelia's hand.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question for Mr. Bartman is just to the extent that these setback and step back requirements were part of the original intention of the zoning, are there any significant urban environment repercussions that you would call out as a result of this change? Essentially, sort of, are there any concerns that we should be aware of from an urban design perspective?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in my opinion, and I believe it's reflected in the rest of the PPZ staff, is that we favored this version of an upper story step back over the one that was adopted in the zoning ordinance. And if we had our way, would probably propose this for all upper story step backs in all of the zoning districts. The current one that triggers at 4 stories for a 6-story building creates kind of a 2-story step back that's kind of awkward in an urban design perspective. And because this amendment was favoring the creation of additional housing and our more preferred version of an upper story step back only applying to the top floor ever, regardless of how many stories over 4 you are. So you always just recess whatever the top floor ends up being, whether it's 5 or 6 or 7. Since we favor that anyway, that is also pro-housing, which this entire affordable housing overlay was designed to provide additional flexibility for those 100% affordable buildings. So we thought that this was appropriate as a proposal to reflect what we consider a better urban design, actually.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Does anybody have any further questions or comments to staff or by and between members of the planning board at this time? Seeing none, I'll just weigh in real briefly. Ordinarily, we obviously live in an intensely dense community. At any given point, we're the densest community in Massachusetts, in New England, in the country. Where my parents were growing up, was the most densely populated community in the world. So I'm always a little bit hesitant to review and revise setback issues as it relates to parcels when they're sitting next to other parcels in an already intensely dense community. However, one of the items that we as a community are passionate about, and I as one member of the planning board is also passionate about, is the facilitation of the development of affordable housing. And we've heard a number of items that were raised at the last couple of times that this has come up for discussion, that it has hindered the potential development of additional affordable housing. And I think that is detrimental to our goals as a city and my goals as the chairman of the planning board and somebody who has grown up here and lives here and want to continue living here and having a nice and diverse and welcoming community for people of all backgrounds. So I think my public policy position on making us an inclusive community exceeds my my concern for making us slightly more dense with more restrictive setbacks that might make it more difficult to build affordable housing. So with that in mind, I'm of the mindset that I would like to recommend adoption of this particular amendment to the Land Use Committee and our recommendation. So I don't know if anybody has any further comments or questions or thoughts on this. Yes, Aaron.
Thank you. I have a brief comment that's akin, where I, as one member, also support adoption of the zoning amendment, in part because of all of the things that you nicely elucidated, Chair, and especially as it relates to making affordable housing easier to build, which is a critical part of one of the things that we're trying to do with Summer Vision and as a community. And I think the other things that, make me be strongly in support of adoption of this zoning amendment is that the parcels that are called out as part of this are part of the enhanced districts. So the change here is not in a conserve district, it's called out in this is a part of the city where we could make slightly more dense. And that's exactly what we're doing. The other thing that makes me support this amendment is that, in form, it's following a lot of the other zoning amendments we've had, where in response to real world conditions, we're making contextual updates to the zoning code to reflect what we find on the ground. We've done this in a couple other places where, we go through a massive zoning overhaul and you're changing a lot of things all at once. And you get about 90% of it right. And then with the acknowledgement that we're going to have to come in and patch. And as one member looking at this and looking at this amendment, this feels exactly like what we're doing is patching for real world conditions and patching in a direction that further enhances Summer Vision. So I also support adoption of this zoning map or the zoning text amendment.
Yes, Amelia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I fully agree with what you and Aaron very nicely articulated. I think the only concern I had was whether we might be creating a condition that had a negative impact on other buildings, and the staff explanation that was given that actually from a design perspective this would have been preferred by many in the department gives me confidence that this will not have a negative, even if this had a negative impact, I think it would be strongly worth considering, but I have now renewed confidence that it will not have a negative impact that is meaningful.
Anybody else? No, once gone twice. Seeing none, what I would like to do is move that the planning board recommend adoption of this particular item of other business specific to section 8.1 of affordable housing for adoption by the land use committee and ultimately by the council, seconded by Amelia. Emily, could I please have the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Amelia Aba,
Aye.
Aaron Gino,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Michael Capuano.
Aye. This agenda item has been uniformly recommended for adoption to the Board of Aldermen. Next up is, I will just take the other amendment that's been proposed by the administration. Mayor Valentine requesting ordainment of an amendment to section 12.2 of the zoning ordinances to reflect the recommendations in the 2022 Somerville Linkage Nexus study. I will open it up to members of the planning board for comments and questions to staff on this particular agenda item. Does anybody have anything that they would like to say at this time, I'm more than happy to recognize you. I'm seeing none, but so I guess I'll go. So my thoughts on this particular agenda item are a little bit split because I'll tell you kind of the pros and the cons, right? The pros are this is something that was studied and recommended, but it was also recommended a number of months ago under different economic circumstances. I believe we have in both verbal and written comment someone who's directly involved in the in the study itself, who has cast doubts on whether this is something that should go forward at this time. We've also heard from the business community saying similar things about the current economic outlook and feasibility of implementing this particular study at this time. So as one particular member, I share those concerns. I don't want to stunt the commercial development that we say that we want as a community by making it increasingly difficult to make that development occur when we're in today's markets are a little bit different. But obviously in the last 12 to 18 months, the economy has been a little bit much more uncertain than it was when this study was commissioned, as was reflected by the person who was directly involved in the study. So at this time, as one member, I would not be in support of recommending this for adoption. The planning board in its recommendations regularly does include a narrative to the council. And I would propose that if the board agrees with kind of the way I'm looking at this, that this is not something that we would not be inclined to revisit at some point when we're in maybe in a different economic landscape. But at this time, I think it's a little bit premature, particularly because there has been a decline in the stability of the economy. Market rates have gone up, interest rates have gone up. And I think it's going to not necessarily be as reflective of what a reasonable market issue could be when we get on slightly better footing in some reasonable period of time. But at this period, I'm not sure this is the right avenue for us. But it's certainly not something that I'm foreclosing in the future when we get to a slightly more even keel. But that's kind of where I am on this. I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions or thoughts on that or anything else. Yes, Amelia.
Mr. Chair, through you, I just wanted to ask, I guess I thought from an email that was sent that staff might have more context that they wanted to present in this meeting. I know we did have a presentation of the joint hearing, but absent answering questions, was there anything else we were expecting to hear from the economic development folks? I may have misunderstood the email.
Does anybody on staff have an interest in having a further discussion on things that I've raised or questions that might have come up?
Hi, this is William Blackmer from Economic Development Division. So we don't have a separate presentation that was prepared for this evening. I think that we are here to, answer or address any questions that are related to this item, but we don't have a separate presentation prepared.
Yes, Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's on my mind is just, I recall talking about this a bit at the May 18th meeting, and I'm scanning my notes quickly and not finding it immediately, but my recollection was there was a sense that the higher linkage fee proposal had enough of a buffer zone to accommodate for the changing market conditions. Now, none of this is a perfect science, so everybody's sort of doing their best guess at things based on the numbers that have been run. But my recollection was when we spoke about this, there was a sense that the higher level that was being proposed was still comfortably low enough to not risk scaring a meaningful number of projects away. As a baseline, I appreciate the concern. I'm often concerned we're focused too much on the front end fees and not enough on the steady annual stream of economic benefits and tax revenue that can come from a project. So we do really need to be careful that we're not going to scare off long-term activity for some potential smaller short-term gain. But curious if other folks recall the conversation from last month's meeting in a similar way, or if the planning staff might chime in on their rough judgment of the buffer zone that's built into the proposal in front of us.
Hi, this is William Blackmer from the Economic Development Division. I think what I can say, speaking to your point, Mr. Schuster, is that they're in completing the study, the consultant found that there was a legal justification for raising the fee technically as high as, I believe, $58.28 in order to address the affordable housing funding gap. However, Mr. Seidman's determinations were that raising the fee by $10 to $20, which this proposal is within that range, would not have a significant impact on the attractiveness of development opportunities. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but this is on the lower end of the range of possible recommendations that could have been made.
Thank you. I see Tom Galagani has opened up his camera. So Galagani, if you'd like to respond or make a statement, we are always happy and lucky to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to Mr. Schuster. You used the word buffer, and William certainly answered one perspective on the buffer that our consultant thought about this analysis. And there was some discussion at the joint committee meeting last month about, where this would apply, which projects would this apply to? And there's certainly a fear, generally speaking, certainly among the economic development and planning staff, that we don't want to impact projects that are already in the process of launching. And so we are in the middle of a process to try to clarify which projects would be impacted and which ones with a potential change and which ones would not. And certainly the 2.2 million square feet of commercial development that's currently under construction in the city would not be impacted. So we'll see those projects. They're already permitted, completely permitted, and they're on their way. Would not be impacted by an increase if this was voted on by the city council later on at some point in the future. There's a whole host of projects that are multi-phase master plan special permit projects that the planning board has approved in the past. For example, Boynton Yards, they're in the middle of their second building. They have ultimately 5 buildings that they're building, and none of those buildings would be impacted so long as they continue to make progress. They wouldn't be impacted by an increase in fee. They're all subject to the fee as it existed when the master plan special permit was approved. In the case of Boynton Yards, that was, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And other projects like 5 Middlesex, the Assembly project in Assembly is under a similar case where the master plan, the revised master plan that was, or actually the equivalent is a PUD, I think, in this case, that was approved by the planning board years ago, and they're building the first of what might be 3 buildings, or the 2 buildings are completed, 1 potential new building would be built. And none of those buildings would be impacted by any change in linkage. The linkage that was in place when the master plan special permit was issued will apply almost in a universal sense. If these multi-phase projects are delayed or stopped and have to come back and seek some sort of revision, then they might be, the future phases of those projects might be subject to a change. But many of these projects in the city are, I'm going to use the term, locked in, even though that's not an absolute. So all the cranes that you see in the sky and some more that have yet to appear on the horizon will continue without any impact from a change in linkage. Any projects that have not been envisioned or have not been approved by the planning board certainly would apply. And that's, of course, anything, frankly, most of Innerbelt and a big chunk of Brick Bottom, and maybe some additional places, some future redevelopment sites and assembly. They'd all be subject to this, but again, those applications are not ready. And some of these projects aren't even conceived. I hope that gives additional perspective when I think about a buffer. There's all kinds of buffers to think about.
I appreciate that, Mr. Galagani. Thank you. Aaron, I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. So for me, it's also a bit of a mixed bag, but I think I lean more towards a recommendation than a no recommendation, in part because really what we're trying to do with this amendment is to support additional housing, which has been really hard to do. We've got a lot of commercial development coming in. I think Councillor Ewan-Campen made a really good point during last hearing, which is not making new land. So Somerville, just by its clear proximity, has an argument that it will continue to be a desirable place to develop, right? Even without the linkage fees. And this linkage fee, if I remember correctly, is only just one of several linkage fees. And I guess my stance is, based on the report, we can support a higher fee to be able to support a more robust, affordable and housing-based program within the city. Not affordable housing, but support the, basically more money into the pool to do exactly what we want to do in terms of the housing aspect of it. But I totally see the delay. And I guess where I'm torn is you get members of the business community, they're saying now is not the time, but I question when they'll ever say it is the time. And I just, I almost wonder if we can recommend with a delay or recommend with a phasing approach. So we kind of almost treat it like the Fed, right? We're going to raise interest rates 25 basis points in 6 months, and then we're going to ratchet it up from there up until a known point to give the development community a lot of clarity in where we're heading. And this is what we want to do. This is where we're going. We're not there now, but we're going to ratchet into getting there. And it gives a little bit more consistency than these sort of step changes, which cause a lot of uncertainty and consternation. So, which is, I realize, not really a great answer, but, can we give a very nuanced recommendation to the council with, at least as one member, support, but with a whole bunch of considerations to see how you could actually enact this, respecting potential delays or phased approaches.
So, Aaron, thanks. I share where you want to go on this, because I think at least from what you just said. You, I think, share some of the concerns that I also have about doing either, yes or no, right? I think there is a middle ground. The unfortunate thing is we have to make a recommendation on the proposal that is before us. So I don't think we have the opportunity to say we would like the proposal, the amendment as proposed by the administration to change. Because what we have in front of us is the particular proposal that is designed to be implemented upon recommendation and adoption. That's why I'm more inclined, based on the concerns that I have and that it seems like you might share, is making a no recommend, not a denial, but making a no recommendation with the caveat that the planning board is appreciative of this particular amendment and thinks that it should certainly be revisited for reconsideration and potential readoption. But at this point, because again, I tried to say it with a nicer way than you've said it. Not to say that it was bad, but you're right. No developer is ever going to say, please charge me more, right? At the same time, I recognize at this very particular economic junction that it's pretty dicey. I don't always love when the government tells private enterprise, you're right, this is within your comfort zone and your buffer. We've heard some pretty, I think, significant pushback on one, whether that's feasible at any point, but certainly whether that's feasible today. So for me, I would love to make a recommendation saying, let's phase it in, let's change the amendment and make a recommendation. Unfortunately, I don't think that's something that we can do. I think we have to make a recommendation on the proposal that's in front of us, but I think we can and should and have historically made a recommendation that explains why we're making the recommendation and hopes for what we might see in the future. So to the extent that that's something that you would be comfortable with, I think that might maybe be a position that at least you and I might be able to agree on for a recommendation. Is a no recommendation based on the current existing economic factors that we've heard from a number of different stakeholders and also ourselves. But this is something that we can and should revisit in the future. That's at least a proposal from me. I don't know if that's something that you can get behind, but that's kind of where I'm at on this. I see Jahan, unless Aaron, you wanted to continue the discussion, because I'm happy to have it. This is what we're here for.
Yeah, maybe just very quickly, because I really do want to hear what I think Jahan and Michael both had their hands raised. And as one, I would be more comfortable with a no recommendation than a deny, or like for sure. And maybe just a point of order for the council side, or like how that process works. If we make a no recommendation with our rationale, they as the council could decide to adopt or not adopt as they desire after reading that recommendation. That's the question.
We could make a recommendation saying, deny this is the worst thing I've ever seen, and if you do this, you're basically killing all my children, and they don't have to listen to it.
Okay. That helps a lot. So thanks. I think I could get behind to answer your direct question, I could get behind a no recommendation with these economic conditions as described, and that we're generally supportive with a phased approach and ratcheting and anything we can do to kind of smooth out that decision curve and give some confidence to development coming in.
Sure. Thank you. Jahan, I see your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also struggled with the recommendation matter here, because I see linkage fee and the study itself to have some significant merit for all the points mentioned by you and my fellow member Gino. What I would like to have the opportunity to better understand, and if staff has this information, is to find out whether other communities, whether they're aware of any other communities in, let's just say, Eastern Massachusetts, if there's a general trend trajectory that they're aware of that they could share with us. Not that should impact our recommendation here. I just want to better understand, under market conditions, under all the challenges that have been mentioned, whether there's any record or information that could help this board and I as one member.
Through the chair, if I can, I want to point out that Boston recently passed a change to their linkage ordinance, a significant increase, just like Somerville's contemplating. And they did choose a phased approach. So they, I believe it's over a 2-year period where, and William perhaps can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they increased it 50% in year 1 and then 100% of the increase in year 2. They also did interesting things like treat lab buildings differently than regular office buildings. But Boston is a much bigger real estate market, so they found it necessary, I think, and supported to really notice the distinction between lab buildings and the impact of lab buildings and regular office buildings. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, Mr. Galagani, can I ask you, is there a reason? Because if you've indicated, this is not something that I'm familiar with because this is not my primary job, but it is something that I'm deeply involved in, obviously. Is there a reason that Somerville didn't also look at a phased approach like you just described Boston did?
We didn't consider a phased approach. We thought being straightforward and being clear and taking a look at the pipeline of projects that are already in place. We certainly were thinking about, geez, if we were to change this, is this changing the rules on some projects that are on the launching pad but haven't launched yet? Is there something in the pipeline on the planning board docket that we want to give a little bit more time to? If the project had already been conceived and is very close to coming to the planning board, perhaps then delaying implementation might make some sense, because that project was conceived of with a certain set of expectations, baseline assumptions. What is linkage? What are my construction costs? What are land costs? And we knew this past spring, as we saw this sort of playing out, the planning board has approved a couple of significant projects. And there don't seem to be, there are some on the horizon, but they're not pending. But again, it's something that we considered, but we ultimately decided that it's probably more straightforward and simpler to think of doing the phasing upon adoption.
Thank you. I saw Amelia's hand, and Aaron, did you also raise your hand, or were you just fixing your glasses?
Just scratching my head.
Okay. I do that all the time. I'm a constant head scratch face. But I did see Amelia's hand raised.
Mr. Chair, I think Michael had his hand up before I did.
Yeah, I do. Okay. It's these small boxes, Michael. I'm sorry. I'm not picking on you, man.
It's all good. I realize I'm your least favorite now. No big deal.
Oh, man.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Clerk Gino and I are very much of one mind tonight, just back to back, same ideas. So I think I'm in the same mindset. I do generally want to see something like this come into play. And I also like the idea of a graduated approach as opposed to an instantaneous jump. Can staff speak a little bit to how the mechanics of this may work? If we take the assumption that the city council really trusts in our recommendation and we come back with a no recommendation and they decide to kind of go back through, kind of the working of this, is this something that can come back to us at the next land use committee, or is this something that has to be kind of stalled for a year, or can the staff speak to that a little bit?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe I might be able to answer that question. Daniel Bartman, the Deputy Director of PPZ. The only way an item cannot come back in front of the board is if it's voted down. So frequently, that's one of the reasons for the no recommendation. But then the City Council would typically leave the item on the table, and so that it can even be adopted in that same condition. Typically, they would have to come up with a different version of that same amendment. So if something is denied, that would mean that you can't resubmit that for 2 years. So they typically either leave it on the table to expire after its 90-day clock, or address it through making substantive changes in the meantime. So it would only be a negative result if it was actually voted down.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, Mr. Chair, I definitely would be supportive of making a recommendation for some modifications, although I guess it's not a formal recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody's hand that I see Amelia's. Amelia, before I call on you, is there anybody that I'm stiffing before I call on you? Okay, go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with many of the sentiments that have been sort of shared here, but I feel like it was very impactful to me that the author of the study conceded that the economic conditions since the study was concluded may merit rethinking the recommendation. And I'm also thinking about this in the context. I'm thinking about this in the context of sort of our competitor cities and where development is likely to go, because I do come to the board from the perspective of a developer. And I think it's rare that someone is looking to build a project in Somerville or in Watertown. I think it's more often the case that a developer is looking to build an office building or a lab in a place where the numbers work. So like in a inner ring suburb, right? We have a competitive set, and I don't know the full picture of the linkage fees and other costs that add up across those other cities, but I'm aware that by increasing this, we are reducing whatever competitive advantage we may currently have. And that may be well worth doing in light of the way that it feeds into our goals and to the point that, there's not new land being created. But I do wonder how this relates to the upcoming code change of the energy stretch code, because that was adopted by the city in January. This study was concluded, I believe, in October of 22. That was adopted in 23 and goes into effect very soon. And I think there are probably people more knowledgeable than I about that code change on the line here. But it's my understanding that it's a pretty significant jump from the sort of current code to the stretch code in terms of development cost and in terms of sort of the implicit obligations and constraints that are created through that. And I wonder if anyone on the planning or economic development side can speak to whether I also don't know the full range of our competitive set cities that have or have not adopted that same code, but I'm wondering if anyone has any more information that would help us understand how these two things on top of one another would look. Sorry, yeah.
Thank you for the question, through the chair. I am aware that both Watertown and Cambridge have passed the specialized code and stretch energy code, and they're set to implement them the same day that Somerville is set to implement them. I don't know about Boston, I don't know offhand, and perhaps we could look it up during this meeting. And I concede that is that code is certainly going to impact some projects that have not launched, that do not have a building permit. So for example, just anecdotally, I've spoken to the developers of the Biomed Realty at Assembly Innovation Park, the former Assembly project. And their first building, they're ready to open up in the next 3 to 6 months, but their second building, they're in the design phase. It's been approved by this board, but now they've yet to pull the building permit. And I know they are aware, and they're certainly not going to pull that building permit in the next 2 weeks to beat the deadline. And so they're re-engineering the project. And I assume that means that there will be some additional costs, certainly additional design costs to redesign the building, redesign the systems in the building to comply with the new codes that are set to launch in a few weeks. So there is a cost increase. I certainly don't firsthand know what that increase is, but it's a real situation that they need to pay attention to.
Thank you for that. And thank you also for the update on what some of our peer competitor cities have done, knowing that they've made the same change is helpful.
Yes, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to go on the record in saying that I am very much aligned with what Vice Chair Aboff raised, and my question to Mr. Galagani was along the same consideration. So, at this point, with all the additional information, I'm also in support of the no recommendation, simply because we need to ensure that that Somerville remains competitive. I would also like to go on record by saying that the incremental approach that Member Gino mentioned and Mr. Galagani mentioned for Boston would have been my preferred approach. However, since that avenue option is not available, no recommendation would be optimal from my perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments or questions that they would like to raise at this time on this particular item on the agenda? Seeing none, and taking obviously listening to staff and listening to you all, my colleagues, I think we are at a place where we would be supportive of what the planning board created a number of years ago as a middle ground between a yes and a no recommendation, which is a no recommendation with comments and a narrative for the city council to evaluate and consider when they take up their discussion and their deliberations. So I think we are at a place where I would like to make a recommendation on this particular agenda item for a no recommendation to the land use committee. But part of that no recommendation, I would like to include the discussion the planning board has had over this and the concerns that they have raised, the questions that they've had, and the considerations that we hope the land use committee, the city council, and the administration will look at in the coming months on where we might want to go with this, whether it be a phased approach for a rewrite or a revisit, whether it be a straight up delay on reconsidering a flat increase, as we've also discussed, because I think all of these have merit and have value for inclusion in the discourse on this particular amendment, and where we want to go with our linkage fees. So ordinarily, when we make a recommendation like this with a request for a narrative of the points that are raised, the draft recommendation comes to me from staff before I take a look, and I think it goes to Amelia as well as vice chair, to make sure that the narrative that's going along with our recommendation accurately reflects the discussion, the considerations that the planning board has made on this, to make sure that we're not missing somebody's valid point or concern or question, so that when the land use committee and the full board get it, they have the opportunity to really take a look at what we've suggested, what we've thought, what we've discussed. So that would be my my motion for a recommendation, for a no recommendation with all of that narrative included. Seconded, I believe, by Amelia. And if anybody has any further discussion, I'd like to ask Emily to please call the roll on this particular recommendation.
This is Emily Hutchings. Amelia Aboff,
Present.
Aaron Gino,
Aye for no recommendation with comments.
and just to clarify, I apologize, Amelia, you were saying an aye vote as well?
I'm
No.
abstaining from voting on this.
Okay. Jahan Habib,
Aye for no recommendation.
Michael Healy,
Aye for no recommendation.
Michael Capuano.
Aye for no recommendation with the narrative as discussed by both my motion as reflected by the discussion of plan. So, thank you. We have a no recommendation as being issued to the Land Use Committee on that agenda item. I would like to then take up the last item on our agenda, which is Union Square One Development LLC, requesting the adoption of a zoning text amendment. So I would invite any of my colleagues to make comments, ask questions, otherwise engage in discussion and debate and discourse. Yes, Aaron.
I actually had a clarifying question. I was reading, so ISD provided an assessment of this zoning text amendment, and they outlined a number of cases. I think to me, the big one was that should this, and this is my understanding, and what I'm going to be asking for is clarification from ISD or someone on staff what this actually means. In that letter, ISD seemed to indicate that should this zoning text amendment be approved, and should this particular building come before the board, it would be subject to a master plan special permit before a building permit. And the sort of requirements of the master plan special permit would be very hard to meet. I'm just trying to get maybe a better understanding from ISD what that letter effectively means for the text as proposed, because based on my understanding, it seemed to create a very narrow or impossible path.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is Deputy Director Dan Bartman from PPZ. We don't have anyone from ISD present tonight, and I understand that their letter was transmitted to you today. For those of the members of the public that are also here, that's also on its way to the Land Use Committee and will be posted on their agenda page for the next time they meet. But effectively, the answer is yes. The ISD reviewed both the presentation that was given that night and the amendment text itself, and found that it did not reflect the fact that the Union Square sub-area of the Master Plan Development Overlay District only permits development through the two-stage, first a master plan, followed by site plan approval for any buildings, thoroughfares, and civic spaces that are that make up that master plan. And because of that, the requirements for a master plan include for the plan to propose a neighborhood park and a plaza somewhere on the land area included in the proposal, which in this circumstance is limited to just the D6 parcel itself, and that the proposal as presented did not reflect the requirements of a master plan, which is, I believe it was 29 to 35,000 square feet of civic space, and that was not included. So the administration's feedback is limited to just the ISD review because of those non-compliance problems. All of OSPCD has set aside any design questions and any kind of questions about the city's relationship between the SRA and the chosen master developer for Union Square. We've set those aside because ISD found compliance problems with the proposal as presented to us, should this be adopted. And your I think reading of this is correct because ISD does not comment on policy. They are strictly looking at compliance. And so since they found compliance problems, their feedback is limited to that. And that's not even explained in the letter because they don't comment on city policy. So channeling them, I would say that you read that correctly and summarize the feedback that they provided to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bartman. And I think that colors sort of my entire opinion on the text, notwithstanding or text amendment, as one member, notwithstanding the substantive details of what was actually presented and sort of the community feedback and my take on that. It's just, it seems that should we approve this text amendment, we create an entire compliance issue which would prevent the thing that we may want to permit, which is just very strange to me. And I guess that's my comment at this point. I would love to hear what my fellow board members have to say about this as well.
Thank you. I see Amelia's hand before my own. So go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I expressed some confusion, I think, at the joint hearing, and I continue to feel some confusion around this proposal because I find it very difficult to believe that it is in almost any circumstances appropriate to amend the text of the ordinance in response to a proposed project. Like there are permitting paths and there are permitting paths. And it struck me that perhaps requesting a map change for this parcel to a designation that would allow for a larger floor plate or longer frontage might have been a path that, you know, would have been entertained. But to say this zoning doesn't work for my project, let's change the zoning, is sort of not how I've ever seen any kind of regulatory authority in the zoning space work. So that's an overarching concern I have about the process here and about precedent. Unless Michael with his longer tenure or someone on OSPD tells me that there is in fact, you know, this is a very different case from what we were just talking about with the affordable housing overlay, where there have been a number of projects that have encountered a similar problem, and therefore we have amended the zoning text to reflect a condition that is experienced by multiple properties as a, you know, of a type across the city. So that's, I guess, my first concern. Like a secondary concern would be that the proposal that the change would accommodate is misaligned with any number of planning documents that this board's remit is to ensure projects adhere to. So, thank you.
Thank you. Aaron, are you able to hear us now that you got some headphones?
I could hear you before. I just have some background noise that I want to isolate from.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Just want to make sure you're a full participant.
I am fully here. Thank you, Chair, for confirming.
Okay. Amelia asked me kind of a question, but I'm happy to respond and also offer my thoughts here, but I would like to leave it open for my remaining board members if you have any comments or questions first. Okay, so to answer your question, Amelia, on in my tenure on the board, have I seen things like this where we've changed via a text amendment? In my recollection, we have not. There obviously may be some, but I've been here for a little bit. Where we usually do see this is through the request for map change. And when I have seen, and it's happened a couple of times since we've done the zoning overhaul, and we've usually recommended against it, unless the administration has come forward and said, you know what, this particular owner is right. This was complete oversight. We completely screwed this one up, and we need to fix it. That's not seemingly the case here. So that's kind of my answer to your question. My thoughts on this are a little bit. You said you had some confusion. I don't have much confusion on this one. The way I view it, I view it as we have zoned a particular thing after a very, very lengthy public process. And we started rezoning Union Square, in my recollection, back in give or take 2009, 2010. And it's gone through various iterations since then, up to and including the Union Square neighborhood plan and the zoning overhaul. Which means we've effectively now had greater than 8, 9, 10 years of very active public participation and discussion, thoughts, and engagement on what sites should look like, how blocks should be developed through a lengthy public process that was and remains sometimes contentious. We were pretty much at a uniform place on this particular block, where it wasn't going to look like what the proposed text amendment is going to allow. There was pretty extensive discussion by members of the community and this board in various iterations, as well as the Board of Aldermen, and then it became the City Council, as well as multiple mayoral administrations on where we should be and what we should do. I'm not of the opinion that the planning board, and this is my position, the planning board, in my view, does not have a responsibility to discuss or have any adjudicatory authority to talk about the legal rights and positions of various stakeholders. So I know that there has been discussion on certain rights that are owed to certain stakeholders. I don't want to engage in that discussion as one member. I don't think that's our place. That's for bodies that are not us. But I do look at this as a public process concern for me. We have, and I personally have been involved in many meetings on this site, on Union Square as a whole. The neighborhood has come down largely uniformly on this site, including some of the folks that have presented on this, on what it should be. And I don't think that by moving forward with a recommendation for an adoption tonight gives the respect to the public process that this parcel has undertaken, for us to say, you know what, no, never mind. I haven't been shown anything that has demonstrated a substantive mistake in the way we have contemplated what this should be. So for me, it would be a no recommendation or denial of this particular application. I don't like the idea that we've got 10 or 12 years of discussion saying, you know what, no, never mind, without the appropriate neighborhood planning that has gone into both Union Square and the rest of the city. If we had an amended neighborhood plan, that might be different, but we don't. So that's where I am on this. Does anybody have any further discussions or thoughts or concerns, questions? I see Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I generally land in the same boat as far as recommendations go, but I think, I'd add a little bit of context and color in that, 10 or 12 years of public engagement is really important, but we also, I think, in some regards, need to be responsive to changes in the environment, right? If the energy code, for example, significantly changes the requirements to build a certain type of building, I think we should be open to additional public engagement, and perhaps it's through a new neighborhood master plan, as you're highlighting, and perhaps we can do it at the parcel level. I don't really know what that right answer is, but I do think it's worth considering, looking at new ways of permitting parcels different from the way they originally proposed. But I think I also very much echo the Vice Chair's comments around not doing it through changing the ordinance. I feel like those types of adjustments are made for sweeping novel ideas. Like if we needed to come in and talk about a data center overlay, for example, that's something that I think, warrants that type of overhaul. But making a ordinance change for a single parcel, in my opinion, is just, and in my professional life, is not something I've ever seen. So I think just for that reason alone, I would not be supportive.
Thank you, Michael. Does anybody else have any comments or questions before we move forward? Yes, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair Aboff and Member McNeely, for your comments about, and also to you, Chair Capuano, about history of, approving a single or, allowing a single parcel through a text amendment change. It to me also strikes as awkward at best. And I guess maybe the one comment that I want to make is really, notwithstanding my sort of support for a no recommendation or deny based on the sort of way that this is proposed, the comment is around the public comment that we got from, in particular, the Union Square Neighborhood Council and some of the Union Square neighbors, stating that, this new parcel, while not envisioned how it was in, 2016 or on this parcel, is consistent with the neighborhood plan. So, looking at it visually, there's that, in the neighborhood plan, there's that park on the corner. This one's got a park on the corner. Like, we can see consistency with the neighborhood plan. And, if this came through at, I actually honestly don't know what a less awkward or path forward would be, but being able to be responsive to changes in new buildings that are still consistent with the last approved neighborhood plan, I would be generally supportive of. So, I don't think it's fair to say, don't ever deviate. This was our public process. What's the average tenure of someone that lives in Somerville these days? Is it 10 years? Is it 12 years? Are we having all new residents now, and now the needs of the community have changed? So I think that's a valid and fair discussion, sort of generally, especially, in response to some of these neighborhood plans and in response to the public comment. But this particular zoning text amendment, it's like the way it's worded creates this impossibly narrow path. It's, awkward at best and just seems highly abnormal.
Thank you. I see Luke's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My mind's kind of swirling with thoughts about all the different, competing factors and interests here. And one thing I'll just add, and I appreciate everything that's been said so far, is I'm trying to keep in the forefront of my mind, and this isn't the only thing that matters, but it might be the most important thing that matters, is just what actually gets built here, and is that ultimately the best sort of project for Union Square. And sorry, I have kids banging on my door behind me. I'm gonna plow through and hopefully you don't hear them. But it seems like the balance of the comments we've gotten from folks involved in the neighborhood is pretty positive about this, including the Union Square Neighborhood Council. So in a way, that like the process concern is an interesting one, because I do think we should respect plans and the multi-year process that has led to them. In this case, it seems like the central community group representing the residents who were involved in those years of process like the new direction. So I just want to make sure that's said out loud. Now, the reason my mind's swirling is maybe this is all moot anyway because of ISD's letter. I'm still trying to track, like, what, given the facts on the ground, what are the possible paths forward, just given the world as it exists right now. So that might not be for us to settle right now, but if folks could, you know, I would be curious to hear, like, just given the ISD letter and given our role in a process that has many other stakeholders beyond just the planning board, what are the possible scenarios from here to figure this all out?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Deputy Director of Planning, Preservation and Zoning, Dan Bartman. I'm thinking off the top of my head, because we've again set aside the design issues, the relationship between the SRA and US2 because of the compliance letter that came from ISD. However, to overcome a master plan restriction that you can't meet, one might, as a property owner of one of the D parcels, partner with US2. And once you became an applicant of a master plan, you're subject to the full master plan. So if the neighborhood plan requirement and if the neighborhood park requirement and the plaza requirement were being met on one of the other D parcels, that would bring the project in compliance and be building focused. The second thing I would say is that, as many of you have identified, this version of pursuing an amendment to deal with site-related issues is typically the path of a variance. When there are site-specific problems, the state legislature set up a process of applying for variance to address those issues, which are identified as a hardship, be it financial or otherwise, that the site is creating and achieving compliance with the zoning ordinance. So that would be the more traditional way a project that can't or doesn't meet one or more dimensional standards works to become compliant by being granted an exception to the code through a variance. So that's the more traditional way. You know, both of those are more complex. There's an appeal involved with variances. There's a whole master developer that may or may not want to work with other parties involved in those things. So I want to recognize those challenges. And we agree with your comment earlier that the public has found this building is supportive of this building, and that there are many positive aspects to it. We also find that, you know, many of the parcels are being built out that are consistent with the plan as envisioned, but nothing was expected to be absolutely straight line conforming to the plan, because the plan was drawing hypothetical buildings outside of all of the site planning conditions that are uncovered during the permitting process and pursuit of an individual building project. So we've always, and as you all permitted with the original CDSP master plan, that is a reasonable approximation of what was envisioned in the plan pages, but it is not an exact science translating what was drawn hypothetically to real world development on the ground. So either one of these buildings probably achieves many of the desires for the D6 lot, but not all of them, right? There's no mid-block passage in the longer building proposal, but there is a corner civic space. There is a mid-block passage on the original CDSP building, but there isn't a corner civic space. And both of those things were contemplated in the neighborhood plan. So I do want to acknowledge what was mentioned earlier about public support for the proposal and our kind of understanding of both of these buildings, but we've chosen to not go down that path because of the compliance and things that were identified by ISD and the kind of backwards process that this is pursuing rather than variances.
Dan, thank you very, very much for that. Since we've got you, is there an appetite for revisiting the Union Square neighborhood plan? I don't know where we stand as you as a representative of the administration, or from what you have heard from members of the community.
I haven't heard much feedback related to that, specifically like reopening the neighborhood plan to make adjustments. Again, the real world proposal for a master plan is expected to be consistent with the plan, but not a duplicate of what's on the plan pages. Your own decision for the CDSP contemplated additional civic space being created on the D7 parcel. That's not identified in the neighborhood plan specifically, but the achievement of an appropriate level of civic space spread throughout the master plan was something that we all wanted to accomplish, and everybody was supportive of creating more civic space on D7. But we still would find that to be consistent with the general goals and objectives of the plan itself, even if there is a civic space proposed on a lot where we did not envision one during the planning process. So that's the kind of flexibility that is inherent to the master plan special permit that, or CDSP as it used to be called, in the permitting process, right? Your board assesses whether or not the proposed master plan lives up to the expectations of the neighborhood plan, even though it won't ever be an exact duplicate.
Thank you. I appreciate the dialogue. So I always welcome your expertise and your thoughts, Dan. You're an asset to the city and to this board. Does anybody have any further comments or questions before we move ahead? Because it seems like kind of reading the room here. It seems like we're at a position where I see Aaron. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick maybe comment for the record where I echo a lot of Member Schuster's statements. There's a plane going overhead. You might be getting some background noise. Yep. Good old Logan flight paths.
We tried.
I know. Runway 17 or whatever it is. Anyway, I echo a lot of Member Schuster's comments of, I see where the community's at. They like this new thing. The important thing to the neighborhood is what actually gets built. And I totally respect that. And had this come forward in a different process or, some other way where we can have that discussion, I would love to have that discussion. I respect the desire and having a community space on the corner, potential library or whatever else is proposed. Maybe even sneaking a through block passage through the building. These are great things to discuss. But just with how it's proposed, I'm just not comfortable with that. And I want to put the support and recognition of what we're getting back from the community on the record. So that's really what I wanted to say here. But I don't think it really changes my opinion one way or another on this, a text amendment. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that, Aaron. Thank you. I think where we're at is collectively not a denial, but a because the denial, I actually don't know if this board has ever made an outright recommendation for a denial of a particular amendment. I think the strongest we've done is a no recommendation. I mean, we may have, but I think if an applicant realizes that we're going to make a denial, they'll usually withdraw it. But I think that where we're at as a board is probably a no recommendation with again, a narrative of some of the discussions that we've had to inform the council and the committee on why we're making the no recommendation. So with that in mind, what I think I'd like to do, unless anybody has any other discussions they'd like to raise. Michael.
I just wanted to note the vice chair had her hand up a couple of times and just want to make sure you saw it at one point.
I didn't see that, but I did see you, so you can't say anything more about me.
Thank you, Michael.
Amelia, yeah, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
So I apologize.
Apologies. If we are going to make a recommendation of no recommendation rather than a negative recommendation, as one member, I would like to make sure that it is worded strongly enough that it is given due consideration. Something else that comes up when we discuss even a map change is the idea that we need to make recommendations, and the land use committee needs to vote on things that if the the renderings that were presented in last week's meeting have no legal authority or relationship to the proposed amendment, right? If we were to recommend this amendment, or the city council were to adopt this amendment, that amendment would be there. And then if the developer sold that land to someone else who wanted to do something egregious with that new flexibility, they would be free to do so. So I would really like to make clear that the mechanism that is being proposed is something that the board is opposed to, or if that is the common feeling, even if the project itself might be something we would readily entertain, given the community feedback, because I really have strong concerns about the use of this vehicle and the way that it could be abused, in addition to ISD's concerns about its ability.
Yeah, I mean, so Amelia, you have a number of options here if you want. I mean, one is to make your own motion to deny, and we can move forward on that. The other is to vote no on the no recommendation that I think I'll probably make. For me, I would go with a no recommendation with the significant concerns that you raise and that I share. That it seems like a number of our colleagues also share, but that's me. You can certainly make your own vote, but that's where I think I'm at. I'm at a no recommendation with a please don't bring something back to us like this in this format again.
Mr. Chair, I am aligned with you in that. I guess I was soliciting input from the rest of our colleagues about whether a narrative that emphasized our concern with the process was something that other people would be supportive of. And I will stop pushing on that item if it's not something that's commonly felt.
It was my understanding that was going to be part of the narrative anyway.
Great. Okay,
Aaron, I saw your hand.
That was me trying to second the vice chair in support of a narrative with even a hypothetical would be great, just to give a real world example of should another developer buy it, they could build a Darth Vader monstrosity, blah, 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 blah.
Just without that one vulnerability and we'll be fine.
Exactly.
So, does anybody else have anything else that they would like to raise at this point for the benefit of this vote? No. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move that the planning board make a recommendation of no recommendation for this particular agenda item, with the narrative inclusive of the discussion and the concerns that were raised and that was had by and among the members of the planning board, both as to process and to hypothetical Death Star. Seconded by Amelia. Emily, could I please have the roll called?
This is Emily Hutchings. Amelia Abah,
Aye.
Erin Gino,
Aye.
Shahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Michael Capuano.
Aye. We have a unanimous vote of a no recommendation. And again, all of the proposed votes and narratives come to me and come to, I believe, Amelia as well for review to make sure that they appropriately reflect the concerns and discussions that we've had on these. So, thank you all. Before we have no other items on the agenda. Before we go, I want to raise one issue that's come to my attention for concern over public testimony submitted for consideration by the planning board. The planning board has its own rules and regulations that it sets and that we all voted on. And part of those rules and regulations, which has always been part of the rules and regulations of the planning board, is to accept written comment and testimony by noon to the planning department at planning@somervillema.gov before our next meeting. This isn't arbitrary. This isn't something that we just decided, we wanted to do. This is something that allows the planning board and planning staff to be able to accumulate all of the written testimony and deliver it in a timely way to members of the planning board, because this is all a part-time gig for us. We all have real lives, so we can't necessarily get something the day of the decision and review it. This is something that the planning board has deliberately decided as a body to implement so that we have an opportunity to give due consideration for all the testimony that we receive. And we ask for it at a particular website, or email address rather, because it's easiest to distribute it this way. The planning board does not accept testimony and does not consider testimony that it receives after that. Why? Because one, that's violative of the planning board's rules and policies and procedures that we have voted on. And two, because it would be unfair to every other individual or group or entity that wanted to submit testimony afterwards. So that's why we have that deadline. That is not something that's arbitrarily decided by staff. That is not something that's arbitrarily decided by the administration. That is something that the planning board has decided. So when I have heard concerns by members of the public that they submitted something to a department that was not planning@somervillema.gov, or there's something that came in after the deadline, that's something that the planning board's rules and regs don't allow. I'm a lawyer. I submit things to courts all the time. If I give it to the wrong court late, it's going to be late. It's not going to be considered. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we have not considered, testimony in certain circumstances when it comes in past the deadline. It's not something that's designed to be mean. That's not something that's designed to be exclusionary. In fact, that's completely the opposite of that. It's designed to make sure that everybody that wants to be heard has the equal opportunity to be heard in the form that the planning board has designed and contemplated. So in case anybody asks you as to what's going on, that's it. Those are the rules and regs that we've decided. If we want to amend them to accept written testimony 2 minutes before a meeting so we can all really properly evaluate it, we can do that if we want. I would not be supportive of it. I think there needs to be a deadline for the benefit of actually running an efficient meeting and having cohesive and appropriate deliberation. But that's just me. And if this is something that the planning board wants to raise when we review our rules and regs at any point, we are, certainly more than capable of modifying our regulations. So that's it. Does anybody have any comments or questions that they have on that or on anything else? Okay, seeing none at 7:37. Planning board's next meeting, I think, is not until July. So what I'm going to do now is move to adjourn. Seconded by Amelia. Emily, could I please have a roll call?
This is Emily Hutchings, Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
Erin Gino,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Michael Capuano.
Aye. Okay. Thank you all very much. I'll see you in a few weeks. Good night. Enjoy
Thank
the
you.
long.
Okay.